My brother treats me like his personal assistant and maid, forcing me to handle his messy breakups. But when he asks me to clean the apartment of his latest missing girlfriend, I find her engagement ring, and my own name engraved on the inside of the band. The damp weight of a mop bucket has always felt more familiar to me than the touch of a hand. At 65, my knuckles are swollen from years of wringing out the messes my brother Leo leaves in his wake. It wasn't a surprise when the phone rattled on my nightstand at 4 in the morning. Leo doesn't call to check on my blood pressure or to ask if I've finished that quilt I've been working on for 3 winters. He calls because there is a stain on his reputation that only my hands are steady enough to scrub away. Growing up in our small house on the edge of town, the roles were cast before we could even walk. Leo was the star, the golden boy with a smile that could melt the frost off a window pane. I was the nurturer, a polite way of saying I was the one who followed behind him, picking up the toys he broke and smoothing over the feelings he hurt. Our mother used to pat my hand and say, "He's just high-spirited, Martha. It's a sister's job to keep the peace." That peace became my cage. While Leo went out and chased every whim, I stayed back, becoming a professional ghost in his life, paying his overdue electric bills with my meager savings and writing apology notes to the neighbors when his parties got too loud. This latest phone call followed the familiar, frantic script. "She's gone, Martha." She snapped and ran off, he panted into the receiver. He didn't sound heartbroken, he sounded inconvenienced. Sarah was a sweet woman, a librarian who had spent the last 6 months trying to convince herself that Leo's sharp tongue was just a quirk. Now, according to Leo, she had vanished into the night after a petty argument about dinner. He needed me to go to her apartment, the one he'd been staying in, and clear out the clutter before the landlord came by. I've become an expert at packing up the remnants of women's lives. It's a grim ritual. Over the last decade, I've handled the exits of at least 5 different loves of his life. Each time I am the one who folds the silk blouses, wraps the ceramic mugs in newspaper, and drops the boxes off at the local charity bin. I remember a girl named Elena who left behind a single expensive pearl earring. Leo told me to just throw the mate in the trash because it wasn't worth the effort to find her. Then there was Claire, who left a stack of handwritten poetry that I secretly kept in my bedside drawer because I couldn't bear to see her soul end up in a dumpster. Leo never looked at these items. To him, these women were like seasonal coats, useful for a time then easily replaced when the lining began to fray. When I pulled up to Sarah's apartment complex, the morning fog was still clinging to the brickwork. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Using the spare key Leo had pressed into my hand, I stepped inside. Usually when a woman leaves in a huff, the place looks like a hurricane hit it. Open drawers, missing suitcases, a sense of frantic movement. But Sarah's place was eerily still. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. The tea kettle sat on the stove, still half full of cold water. Beside it, a porcelain cup held a tea bag that had turned the water a dark, bitter brown before drying up completely. It looked like she had been right in the middle of a quiet evening. I moved toward the hallway and saw her favorite wool coat, the navy blue one she wore every single day because it matched her eyes, still hanging on its hook. A woman doesn't run off in the middle of a cold October night without her coat. A small, cold knot began to tighten in the pit of my stomach. I tried to push it down, telling myself I was just being an old woman with an overactive imagination. I started my work, pulling a black trash bag from my pocket, but my hands were shaking. I found myself looking at the small things, the way her shoes were lined up neatly by the rug, the fact that her toothbrush was still damp in the bathroom. It didn't feel like a breakup. It felt like a life that had been interrupted mid-sentence. As I began to scrub the kitchen counters, my mind drifted back to 2 years ago. There was a woman named Rebecca. She had discovered that Leo was skimming money from the community center fund where they both volunteered. Leo had come to me crying, saying she was unstable and was trying to frame him because he wouldn't marry her. I believed him. I always believed him. I helped him craft a narrative, whispering to the ladies at the church and the neighbors that Rebecca had been struggling with her nerves. We ruined her reputation so thoroughly that she moved 2 states away just to escape the stares. I realized now, as the ammonia from the cleaning spray stung my eyes, that I hadn't been keeping the peace. I had been an accomplice. I had spent decades helping a predator maintain the disguise of a gentleman. The guilt felt like a physical weight, pressing on my chest as I moved into the bedroom. I needed to finish this and leave. I decided to move the heavy oak dresser to vacuum underneath. Sarah was meticulous and I didn't want the landlord to have any reason to complain. It was an old, sturdy piece of furniture and it took all my strength to shift it. As the wood groaned against the floor, something caught the light. It wasn't a dust bunny or a lost coin. Wedged deep inside the floor vent, tucked just out of sight, was a small navy blue velvet box. My breath hitched. I knelt on the floor, my old knees complaining, and fished the box out with trembling fingers. I expected it to be empty, or perhaps to hold some cheap trinket Leo had bought to appease Sarah. But when I flicked the lid open, the breath left my lungs. It was a ring. Not a simple band, but a high-end vintage engagement ring with a diamond that looked like a trapped star. It was far too expensive for Sarah to have bought for herself, and far too tasteful for Leo to have chosen. As I pulled it from the velvet cushion, the cool metal felt like ice against my palm. I turned it over, looking for a jeweler's mark, but my eyes landed on the engraving inside the band instead. My vision blurred. I had to squint and move closer to the window to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. There, etched in delicate, flowing script, was my own name, Martha. And beneath it, a date from 20 years ago. The exact date I was supposed to have been married to the only man I ever loved before he abandoned me. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't Sarah's ring. This was my ring. The one I was told was never bought. The one I was told didn't exist because my fiancé had supposedly taken my savings and disappeared into the night. My heart didn't just race. It thundered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Why was this in Sarah's apartment? And more importantly, why had my brother been keeping it hidden for 2 decades? The silence of the apartment suddenly felt predatory. I looked at the ring, then at the empty coat on the hook, and finally at the door. I had spent 40 years cleaning up Leo's messes, but as I stood there in the dying light of the afternoon, I realized that the biggest mess of all was the lie I had been living. The sunlight hitting that diamond felt like a physical blow. I stood by Sarah's window, the ring heavy in my palm, staring at the cursive script etched into the inner gold. Martha. June 14, 2006. My vision tunneled, and for a moment, the smell of Sarah's lavender air freshener was replaced by the scent of rain and old leather, the smell of David's car. 20 years ago, David was my entire world. He was a quiet man, a carpenter who saw the value in things others threw away. He had promised me a life where I wasn't just Leo's shadow. But on the morning of June 14, he never showed up for our sunrise breakfast. Leo had been the one to find me crying on the porch. He told me he'd seen David at the bus station with another woman, packing a suitcase full of my stolen savings. Leo had chased him, he said, but David was gone. I spent 2 decades believing I was unlovable, a woman so easily discarded that her own fiancé didn't even leave a note. I stayed with Leo because he convinced me he was the only person who would ever look out for me. My fingers brushed over the engraving again. If David had intended to rob me and run, why was this ring here? Why was it in the floor vent of a woman Leo had only known for 6 months? A frantic, feverish energy took hold of me. I stopped being a maid and became a hunter. I didn't care about the dust or the laundry anymore. I marched over to Sarah's small roll-top desk, my heart hammering a jagged rhythm against my ribs. I began to sift through her papers. Sarah was a librarian, organized and precise, but the drawer was locked. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a heavy metal letter opener from the desktop and jammed it into the seam, prying until the wood splintered with a sharp crack. Inside wasn't a collection of love letters or bank statements. It was a thick manila folder labeled with a single handwritten word: legacy. As I spread the contents onto the bed, the air left my lungs. There were photos of me from 20 years ago, blurry shots of me and David at the county fair, things I hadn't seen in half a lifetime. There were photocopies of Leo's old bank records and a list of names: Elena, Claire, Rebecca, the women I had helped him move on from. But the most shocking discovery was a business card clipped to the back of a report. It was for a private investigation firm, and Sarah's name wasn't listed as a client. It was listed as the senior investigator. A realization hit me so hard I had to sit on the edge of the bed. Sarah hadn't fallen for Leo's charm. She had been hunting him. Months ago, I had received a strange, anonymous tip in the mail. A clipping about a missing persons case that looked eerily like David's disappearance. In a moment of rare rebellion, I had sent a small sum of money to an online agency, asking them to look into it, but I never heard back. I thought I'd been scammed. Now I realized that Sarah was the response to that plea. She had gone undercover, dating my brother to get close to the man she suspected was a career manipulator. She wasn't his victim, she was his hunter, until she stopped answering her phone. The sound of a key turning in the front door made my blood turn to ice. Martha? You still in here? You're taking an awfully long time with a one-bedroom apartment. It was Leo. His voice was smooth, draped in that practiced casualness that I had once mistaken for kindness. I scrambled, shoving the folder under the mattress and sliding the ring into the deep pocket of my cardigan just as he rounded the corner. He stood in the doorway, his designer suit looking out of place in the modest room. His eyes scanned the space, landing on the slightly skewed dresser. You look like you've seen a ghost, sister, he said, stepping closer. The smell of his expensive cologne felt suffocating. It's just a lot of work, Leo, I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and brittle. Sarah had a lot of things. He walked over to the desk, his hand hovering near the splintered drawer. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. He didn't look at the damage, instead he turned to me with a small, chilling smile. Loyalty is a rare thing, isn't it? I've always appreciated how you never ask too many questions. Some people like Sarah, they just can't help themselves. They go digging in gardens where nothing good grows. It's a shame when people don't know their place. The double meaning hung in the air like a threat. He wasn't talking about her packing. He was talking about her investigation. He looked at me then, his eyes cold and empty, and for the first time in 65 years, I saw the monster behind the star. I realized he was testing me, waiting to see if I'd blinked. I forced a tired smile, the kind he expected from his obedient maid. I just want to get the deposit back for you, Leo. That's all. He patted my shoulder, a gesture that made my skin crawl, and told me not to stay too late. Once the front door clicked shut and I heard his car pull away, I didn't stay to finish the kitchen. I grabbed the folder from under the mattress and ran. I didn't go to my house. I went to the one place Leo thought I'd never venture. The basement of our family home, the old Victorian house where we grew up. Leo kept the main floor pristine, but the basement was his private domain, always locked for safety. In Sarah's notes she had circled a specific locker number in that basement, a detail she must have squeezed out of him during one of their dates. The air in the basement was thick with the smell of damp concrete and cedar. I used a pair of bolt cutters I'd taken from Sarah's utility closet to snap the lock on Unit 4B. When the door swung open, the light from my flashlight revealed a graveyard. It wasn't a mess, it was a museum. Neatly labeled boxes filled the shelves. One was marked Elena, containing her missing pearl earring and a lock of hair. Another was marked Rebecca, containing the original ledger she had tried to use to expose him. But in the very back, hidden behind a false panel, was a small tin box. With shaking hands I opened it. Inside were the letters I had written to David 20 years ago. Letters he never received. And beneath them, tucked into a plastic sleeve, was David's passport. The truth shattered what was left of my heart. David hadn't left me. He hadn't stolen my money. He had been intercepted on that June morning, and Leo had kept his identity, his history, and my happiness locked in a dark room like a trophy. David hadn't vanished. He had been erased so that I would stay here, forever pouring Leo's tea and cleaning his floors. Standing there in the dark, surrounded by the stolen lives of a dozen women and the remains of my own youth, the grief I'd carried for 2 decades transformed. It sharpened into a cold, lethal clarity. Sarah hadn't run off. She had found this locker. She had found the passport. And Leo, the man who couldn't bear to lose his personal assistant or his secrets, had dealt with her the same way he dealt with anything that threatened his comfort. I wasn't a good sister anymore. I was a witness. And as I clutched David's passport to my chest, I knew that the cleanup was only just beginning. The evidence is in my hands, but Leo is still out there and Sarah is still missing. The weight of David's passport in my pocket felt like a holy relic, a piece of a ghost returned to the living. I climbed the basement stairs of our family home, the wood groaning under my feet as if the house itself were exhaling a long-held secret. I didn't go home to cry or hide. Instead, I drove back to Sarah's apartment. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement. I had spent my life making things look presentable for Leo, but tonight I was going to make sure the truth looked exactly as ugly as it was. I stepped back into the silent apartment and began my final service for my brother. My movements were surgical. I placed the velvet box containing the engagement ring right in the center of the kitchen table, under the harsh glow of the fluorescent light. Beside it, I fanned out the contents of Sarah's folder and David's passport. I used my cleaning cloths to wipe away my own fingerprints from the surfaces, but I left his everywhere. I was setting a stage, using the same meticulous attention to detail I'd used to host his dinner parties and iron his shirts. I pulled my cell phone from my cardigan and dialed his number. My heart was a steady, cold engine. "Leo," I said when he picked up, my voice sounding fragile and breathless, just the way he liked it. "You need to come back to the apartment. I found something Sarah hid. I think it's valuable. I don't know what to do with it." "Valuable?" His voice sharpened instantly. Greed was always his most reliable compass. "Don't touch anything, Martha. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just stay put and don't be a nuisance." I hung up and moved to the corner of the room. I took a small digital voice recorder, one Sarah had hidden in her desk, and tucked it inside a vase of silk flowers on the sideboard. Then I sat in the shadows of the living room and waited. The 10 minutes felt like 10 years. I watched the clock on the wall, the rhythmic ticking sounding like a gavel. I thought about the tea Sarah never got to finish and the life I never got to start. I wasn't just Martha the maid anymore. I was the architect of his ending. The door burst open with a familiar, entitled bang. Leo marched in, his face tight with a mixture of annoyance and anticipation. He didn't even look at me. He headed straight for the kitchen table, drawn to the sparkle of the diamond. He stopped dead. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. He stared at the ring, then at the passport, his shoulders tensing under his expensive wool coat. "What is this, Martha?" he hissed, his voice dropping an octave. He didn't turn around. "I told you to clean, not to dig. You've always had a problem with boundaries." "That's my ring, Leo," I said, standing up and walking into the light. My voice didn't tremble. "And that's David's passport. The one you told me he took with him to South America 20 years ago. Funny how it stayed in our basement all this time, right next to Sarah's notes." He turned slowly, the golden boy mask slipping away to reveal something gray and hollow. He didn't look remorseful, he looked insulted. "I did what I had to do," he snapped, stepping toward me, trying to use his height to intimidate me as he had since we were children. "David wasn't good enough for you. He was going to take you away, and then who would have looked after the house? Who would have looked after me? I saved you from a life of mediocrity, Martha. You should be thanking me." The sheer arrogance of it was the final spark. "You didn't save me, Leo. You stole me. You stole Sarah too, didn't you?" Because she saw through the charm. She wasn't just another girl to be folded up and put in a box. She was coming for you. She was a nosy bitch who didn't know when to quit, he barked, his face reddening. "Just like you're doing now. You think you're so smart? You're a 65-year-old woman who's spent her life scrubbing toilets. Nobody's going to listen to you. I'll tell them you've gone senile. I'll say you planted these things because you're off your medication. Who do you think they'll believe? The pillar of the community or his crazy, lonely sister?" I let him talk. I let him spiral into a confession of his own vanity. He paced the kitchen, venting his frustrations about how difficult it was to manage all these women, how exhausting it was to keep the secrets. He was so caught up in his own perceived victimhood that he didn't notice the faint blue light pulsing from my coat pocket. "They won't have to choose who to believe, Leo," I said quietly, pulling out my phone. The screen showed a live connection. "Because the police dispatcher has been listening to this entire, private conversation. And so has the detective Sarah was reporting to." His face went pale, a sickly shade of white that matched the porcelain teacup on the counter. "You wouldn't." "I already did. I'm not your maid anymore, Leo. I'm the one who finally took out the trash." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Leo lunged for the table, trying to grab the passport and the ring, but the heavy thud of boots on the apartment stairs stopped him cold. The door was kicked open, and for the first time in my life I watched someone else take charge of Leo. They tackled him to the floor, the star of the family pinned against the linoleum he had forced me to wax just hours before. As they let him out in handcuffs, he didn't look like a golden boy. He looked small, pathetic, and old. I followed them out to the porch, leaning against the railing as the cool night air hit my face. A detective stayed behind, talking about the search warrants they were executing at the family home. They told me they had found a shallow grave in the woods behind our property. The closure for David and Sarah that I had prayed for without even knowing it. I sat there on the porch long after the police lights faded. I made myself a cup of tea in Sarah's kitchen, using her favorite mug. The house was quiet, but for the first time the silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. A few months later, I stood in the driveway of our family home and watched the moving trucks haul away the last of the mahogany furniture and the heavy velvet curtains. I sold the house to a young family who wanted to fill it with noise and laughter, things that had been banned under Leo's reign. I took the proceeds and set up a scholarship in Sarah's name for women wanting to study law and investigation. I kept the ring, but I had it reset. It's no longer an engagement ring. It's a necklace that I wear as a reminder of my own strength. At 65, my life is finally starting. I don't have a brother to answer to, no bills to hide, and no messes to scrub. I spent my life being a good sister, but I've discovered that being a free woman is a much better fit. I'm going to travel. I'm going to learn to paint. And most importantly, I'm never, ever going to pick up a mop for a man again.